Hey guys, good morning. It's Miss McCray. I hope you're doing well. This is going to be the last video for this week and for Unit 6A. So remember yesterday, or the last 2 days, we've been doing a lot with the Enlightenment. So Enlightenment ideas will later inspire reforms and revolutionaries to start change around the world. So remember these ideas of three branches of government, or democracy, or freedom of speech, or the right to vote, or to get rid of monarchs. These are going to inspire people and inspire people to take action. And so an example would be the American Revolution. But there are a couple other revolutions after we get back from break that we'll talk about as well, like the French, Haitian, and Bolivarian revolutions, which happened in Latin America. So I'm going to get after it. I'm going to go a little quick, but you have the right to pause and do whatever you need to do to get your notes. So we're going to skip this. So before you can have a revolution, you have to show some symptoms. So we're going to kind of look at a revolution in a sense of like a sickness. And so when we talk about symptoms of a revolution, the first stage is the incubation stage, symptomatic is the second stage, crisis is the third stage, and then convalescence is the fourth stage. And that's when you're on the mend or you're healing up. So add this drawing to your notes on the right. You can just fill it in. So like if you want to draw this little diagram, I don't know if you want to try to draw the world, that's kind of epic in these icons, but you can do symptoms of a revolution at the top to incubation, symptomatic, crisis, and convalescence. And so when we talk about that, I want you to think about this. Before you can have a revolution, there are some conditions that must be present. People of all social classes must be discontented, which means they're unhappy. People feel restless, held down by unacceptable restrictions in society. It could be a religious thing, it could be the economy or the government. So people feel subdued. Also, the scholars and thinkers give up on their way of society operating. So remember, scholars and thinkers are the educated. And so the educated always help push movements forward because they will always be the most vocal about it. So, a couple other things. Number four, maybe the government doesn't respond to the needs of its society. In France, we're going to have an issue with Louis the 17th, or is it 16th? I can't remember. I'll have to look at it. But anyway, he's not feeding his people, and his wife comes out and makes a statement like, oh, they don't have bread, we'll let them eat cake. It's like, no, cake isn't good for nourishment. So if the government's not meeting the needs, if the government is unstable and is unable to get enough support from people, like voting or advocating to support the government, or if the government loses control of its finance. So if the government's running the economy in the ground, or, and in the case of the American Revolution, if the government is taxing people heavily and unjustly, like the people don't have an opinion. So today we're going to talk about the American Revolution. I'm going to keep it quick. So review really quick. So why would any area establish colonies? Well, first of all, England established colonies for wealth. You have to remember that England was the mother country, and then they had 13 colonies in the Americas. The first settlement is going to be Jamestown, and it is going to be in 1607. And the reason I remember this is because in 2007, Queen Elizabeth II came to look at Jamestown because it was still standing. It's a historical site. So these are your 13 colonies. If you look, you can check out North Carolina right here, and South Carolina and Georgia. Georgia was like a prison colony. You'll learn about that in American history. But I also want you to notice that North Carolina is not as long as it is now because of the Appalachian Mountains. In the proclamation of 1763, we were, the colonists, I just say we, I was not there. So anyway, the colonists were not allowed to go past the Appalachian Mountains because Native Americans were in that area and they would attack colonists. So we'll get more into that later. So a couple of things you want to remember. When we talk about the American Revolution, England's going to get into a lot of wars on the main side in Europe. And so they're going to kind of let Americans or colonists during this time do their own thing for about 150 years. And if you think about 150 years, that's three generations of people. That's grandpa, your dad, and like you, or grandma, your mom, and like you. That's three generations of people. Many had no more relatives in England, and they had never been to England because they were born in the colonies. And so, England during this time is going to neglect them. It's called salutary neglect, where England had left the colonies to kind of govern themselves for the most part because they were fighting wars or they were involved or had a lot of things going on in Europe, so they could not keep an eye on their colonies, and they were running and giving the country the money they needed, so they weren't sweating it. So couple of things are going to happen. There's going to be the French and Indian War. That's what it's called in the United States because the French and Native Americans aligned against the British and the colonists. In Europe, you will hear it called the 7 Years' War. It sounds very confusing. Don't let it confuse you. So the British ended up winning this war, which is great. That means the British and the colonists won. But the issue is England is in a lot of debt after this war. And they're like, where do we get the money from? Well, I'm going to tell you. They are going to do a couple things to the colonists. So you're going to watch this timeline that Miss McCrae has. I'm going to zoom out really quick and show you what it looks like. So this is the timeline here, okay? You don't have to make your paper look like this, but you can just do them in order. So anyway, they're going to put some things in place to kind of first of all, get money from the colonists, okay? So the first thing they're going to do is the proclamation line of 1763. Settlers were not allowed to go past the Appalachian Mountains. I just told you about that. And I also told you who was on the other side. Also, we had to look out for the Spaniards because they were over on this side and they would attack British colonists as well. So these are the boundary lines here, but not going past the Appalachian Mountains. The Sugar Act, so they're going to raise the taxes on sugar imported by the colonies. So whatever the colonies are bringing in from sugar from other areas or other colonies, they're going to tax them. And this gives the British sugar growers a monopoly because people are not going to want to buy from other colonies. They're just going to solely buy from the British because they don't want to pay the extra taxes. You have the Quartering Act. This is always really weird when you explain it. 1765. This is where colonists were required to allow soldiers, British soldiers who were monitoring the colonies to live with them. So they had to give them drink, quarters, and fuel and transportation. And they were stationed in their towns and villages. And like, I just want you to think about like if your family member had to take like a British soldier who you kind of didn't like because you wanted to be free and they had to live in your house and stuff and eat your food. Okay. And they were monitoring you. The Stamp Act is going to be the law that requires tax money, like so anything that is sent by mail or anything had to have, any paper product had to have an official stamp. And that's where we get stamps from, and we still have stamps today. The Townshend Acts, which places new taxes on glass, lead, paints, paper, and tea. Let me tell you something, colonists love tea during this time. All these things are used. So what I want you to really understand, so I'm going through this quickly, is that they are going to tax the colonists. But guess what? The colonists are not represented in Parliament in Britain, like in England. So they're not represented, but they're getting taxed. Another event's going to happen, which is the Boston Massacre. So I love this because it's like a true form of propaganda. There was a riot in Boston. Colonists were angry over taxes, and so they started to harass British soldiers that were in the streets. So they took rocks and put them into snowballs and started throwing them at the British soldiers, and then the troops ended up firing on the crowd. There were 5 colonists killed, but they used the word massacre in the papers. Why do you think, and if you look here, it's hard to see, but it says bloody massacre. Like, why do you think that they did that? You know, just think for a second. Well, why would the colonists use the language massacre when only 5 colonists were killed? Okay, they even put a dog in the picture. So think about that. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions like that in Play Pause It. And that's because it's due to propaganda. Okay, so let Miss McCrae keep it moving for you. So the Tea Act is going to be in 1773. It gives a monopoly to the East India Company, which means that they have all this stake in tea, and you can only buy tea from the East India Company. The Boston Tea Party. This is super funny and kind of awesome. So this is a raid made by the citizens of Boston. So there were these group of dudes, radical guys called the Sons of Liberty. And if you have a hint, they wanted to bring liberty and justice to the colonies. So what's messed up is they dressed up like Native Americans and they got on the ships and they threw the tea into the harbor, the tea that came from the East India Company, but they tried to like blame it on Native Americans, which is kind of shady. So this is a protest against tea, like taxes on tea, because they didn't have a vote or a say in how much the tea was going to cost. So one thing that they talk about is how this tea now would cost millions of dollars if it had been thrown overboard. So after this, in response to the misbehavior of the colonists, there were the Intolerable Acts, and intolerable means that they were awful. So they were passed in 1774, but they really were trying to punish Massachusetts because remember, Boston is in Massachusetts. And they were also called the Coercive Acts. So pretty much what Britain's going to start doing is they're going to start tightening their chokehold on colonists during this time. And it's going to continuously make them angry. And it makes them angry because they have been free for 150 years doing what they wanted to do as long as they did their taxes and, provided the goods for the area. But now they're going to chokehold them, and then they're going to turn their wallets upside down and shake them and take all their money. So we'll end up having the First Continental Congress. So this is going to be a session from like September to October where you're going to have your founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, your boy Sam Adams, like all these guys are going to get together and they're going to make a petition and make a list, kind of like the 95 Theses, and say, hey, British government, these are things we don't like that you're doing to us, okay? And so the British government's going to be like, cool, thanks for the list, but like we don't care. So then they're going to have a battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775. This is where American soldiers are going to be Minutemen. And we say Minutemen because these are guys who are like farmers and they pick up guns and like, yeah, we're going to fight against the British, but we don't really know how, but we'll help you. So this is like the shot heard around the world because this was like the first shot of the American Revolution. And so what ends up happening is no one's really sure who shot first, but the Minutemen and the Redcoats are going to fight at Concord, okay? So by 1776, we have our Declaration of Independence, which is drafted by our boy Thomas Jefferson. It declares that the 13 colonies are going to be independent. Let me reframe really quick. They sent a list of grievances and they said, hey, these are the things we don't like. And George III, who was king, said, cool, thanks, rips it up and is like, whatever, I don't care what you guys think because I need your money and you're going to do what I say because you belong to me. By 1776, the Founding Fathers are like, we got to take a risk and we are going to declare our independence. This is a cool video, but I'm not going to show it to you. So, a couple of things. I want to look at a quote really quick. It says, all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is from the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to read you something really quick that John Locke wrote. John Locke wrote, and I'm going to skim right here, all mankind who is but consulted, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions, and when he is and his own preservation comes not in competition. At the bottom, it says right here, or what tends to preservation of life, liberty, health, limb, and of good of another. So Thomas Jefferson takes this directly from John Locke, who is an inspirational, like, Enlightenment philosopher, if that makes sense, okay? So, why did the Founding Fathers alter the statement from possessions to the pursuit of happiness? Let's remind ourselves that slavery is a thing during this time. So, this is a little bit of an intro to the American Revolution. You're going to have one more video today, but I'm going to stop this right here so it's not too lengthy.